To match their win total from last year, they'd have to play 600 baseball. Rest of the way, 30-20. Do they have that in them?
I would say that they've got an opportunity. I mean, they still yet to see Bobby Witt Jr. take off in the way that he did in the second half. I mean, they're really going to have to take advantage of this soft schedule.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another edition of the Calling It How I See It Sports podcast. Blake Terrence here with you. And what a series we just witnessed. The Royals take the first series out of the trade deadline. They start off August winning 2 of 3 against Toronto, maybe the hottest team in all of baseball. I think certainly the hottest team in the American League. They're now sitting at 500. They got back to 500 twice, including today as they wrapped up the series victory. 4 consecutive series wins, all on rubber games. So that was, an area they were struggling a little bit early, and they start off on a bang coming out of the trade deadline. Let's talk about it. Excited to be joined here by Jack Johnson of the Locked On Royals Network. He hosts the Locked On Royals podcast. And, well, Jack, the Royals, doubled down and, stayed the course on the trade deadline. And, one series in, they seem to have been vindicated.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge step in the right direction coming out of the trade deadline because we knew they were going to be, for the most part, pretty aggressive. We know all the players they brought back, but even though some of those guys haven't truly flourished just yet, I mean, Mike Yastrzemski homered on Friday, Randall Grichuk's had a homer and a multi-hit game, but they've yet to really get going. It's still a good sign to know that right out of the deadline when you desperately needed another series win against a team that's been one of the more impressive teams in all the American League and one of the better surprises in all of baseball. It's a huge step forward because going into Boston tomorrow, we know how pivotal that series was or is going to be. But for this one, man, to win the way you did today in extra innings when it didn't look too promising for about 7 to 8 innings, or I should say 7 2/3, big time win. And the pace right now should be to try to get to 86 wins, same record as last year, which means in these final 50, they're going to have to go 30-20.
Yep, and that's exactly where they're at. 56 and 56 after today, 50 games to go, 112 out of 62, out of 162, I should say, down. And so, yeah, to match their win total from last year, they'd have to play 600 baseball. Rest of the way, 30-20. You know, we know what the variable is. It's the offense. Do they have that in them?
I would say that they've got an opportunity. I mean, they still yet to see Bobby Witt Jr. take off in the way that he did in the second half. They're still waiting
Mm-hmm.
for some of the guys at the top of the order to take off, Jonathan India being one, but they have been able to significantly improve from where they were about 2 months ago, or even really a month and a half ago. Now, is it good enough, though, what they're doing right now to get to the postseason? I mean, they're really going to have to take advantage of this soft schedule. I mean, after this series in Boston, they've got Washington, they got Minnesota, then they've got Washington, and they've got the White Sox. So there's 3 series right there against teams that are not very good teams. Let's call it as it is. I mean, Minnesota, they're 52 and 59 after their win against Cleveland today, but we know what they did at the trade deadline. White Sox have been playing much better in the second half, but they're also a team that is near 30 games under 500, and Washington has been really struggling of late as well. So to your question about the offense, if you can have the best version of your offense for that 10 to 12 game stretch, that can do wonders for you in the long run, because we're still waiting for this
Yep.
team to go on that stretch like they did back in April when they went, 17-4 over 21 games. They're going to need to do that again if they're going to surpass someone like Boston or New York or Seattle, Texas, Cleveland. They're going to need to be one of those incredible stories of the second half. And you're exactly right. It does start with the offense.
Are the Twins taking applications? Maybe you and I can go try out. I think they've traded off just about every player on that roster, seems like. So like you said, it's all down to the schedule. I mean, the Royals were, I'm skeptical of the, I guess, prediction of the schedule quality metrics to an extent. Like, but I'm not so skeptical here. Is I guess like what I'm saying, because I'm skeptical of it over a full season. Really, in any dynamic, any sport. I don't like the analysis of like, ooh, like I don't even like the hey, the Buffalo Bills have the second easiest schedule in the NFL this year. Why? Like, because you know what every team is going to do. You know, this week 13 game is going to, I don't love it from that standpoint, but I do think it's important to like provide the context to the feasibility of it because, now you actually have the data you need to know what the schedule is. You don't know what team in August. You might think, oh, well, I'm glad we're facing one team in August, but if they surprise, then you're not anymore. But now you have the data to it. Where do you think you draw the line there of like when you can use the schedule to, I guess, determine your confidence in their success?
Yeah, I mean, baseball is one of those sports that's really hard to predict what's going to happen. I've always felt that way, and even though, in my opinion, if you're a big baseball fan, you love that aspect of it. That it is a bit random, right? You
Mhm.
have this a team that's pacing for 100 wins or already have 100 wins could lose, to a team that's lost 100. It's just the way it goes down. So um, it's not a perfect estimation of as to what you're going to do. I mean, you can look at those series the Royals have ahead of them with Minnesota and Washington and Chicago and say, well, they should sweep two of those teams and they should take two of three from the other. I mean, that's all fine and dandy, and those teams are not great, but you still have to go out there and play good baseball. And these are still grown men that are getting paid millions of dollars to play the game, and they can beat up on you. I mean, the White Sox have been doing that to the Angels over the weekend, and the Angels last week were being talked about as a potential wild card team. Now they've pretty much fallen out of it at this point. So that's not going to be as easy as a series as it looks on paper. In the same way that the series in Chicago didn't look like a favorable one for Kansas City when they were at Wrigley Field. I mean, coming off the series loss to Miami, who's now the
Mm.
hottest team in baseball.
Even this series in Toronto,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have predicted them to win it, probably.
Yeah, I mean,
So
you looked at the pitching matchups. You looked at the way Toronto had been playing, which wasn't great coming off of their series at Baltimore, but there still is that randomness to it. And I look at today, that's another part to kind of dwindle it down even more. The Royals had, what was it, one hit until two outs in the eighth inning, and then Bobby doubles and Vinny singles him in on the next pitch. And those are things that take talent for sure, but they can pop out of nowhere. And that's what we're seeing right now from the Royals, where, you go back to the end of June, they were dead in the water. The offense was terrible. They were banged up with the rotation, but all it takes is something to spark you. And I think we're starting to see a team that is playing off of that. They were very rowdy in the dugout after, that 5-run inning in the 10th because they know how important it is. They know what the expectation is for them, and they know that they've got to play better than anybody else in the American League if they're going to get back to October.
last thing I want to bounce off you here as we react to this series before we move into what happened at the deadline and the big picture stuff. Uh, you know, it's not how sports work, so I get it, but I sometimes think there might be something to it's because again, it's not how sports work, so it's a joke, right? It's a tongue-in-cheek joke that broadcasters make. But I always think you should think and hesitate for just a second and actually think about it when, you know, you play the games the way this Royals team has been, and you have scores of 9-3 victory, 7-4 victory. Admittedly, that one, today was weird. It'd be 5 runs in the 10th inning, but then a 4-2 loss. And you hear broadcasters always make the joke of, when a team racks up a bunch of runs like they did on Friday, like, the starting pitcher tomorrow is wanting them to save some runs. And again, that's not how it works, but that is the theme with this offense is they are inconsistent, and you'll have whole stretches of games or series where they're scoring 5 runs in 3 games, but then they'll put up a 10 spot. Is is there anything to analyze and dissect there at all? Because I look at this team and I even compare them to, like, let's say a similar team in terms of where they're at in the race, like Cleveland. And Cleveland has a worse and has had for this entire season, pretty much, a, um, a run differential that would make you think they're a bad team, and yet they outperform it. Where the Royals, they're not dramatically under or overperforming their run differential, but it still doesn't seem to tell the full story because there's games where they look like a legitimate offense and then whole stretches where they don't. Is there anything to take away from that, or is it just what an offense that's not quite there? That's what you get is inconsistency. Because I think the highs and the lows are a little dramatic.
They have been, I believe. I mean, we saw back in April and May that when this team would have that offensive performance where they'd win 9-1, you thought it might be able to get them going, but then they'd have 3 or 4 straight games where they couldn't score over 2 runs. And it wasn't always against those top pitchers. I mean, more often than not, it was against those
They beat
guys
the
that
hell out
were,
of Logan Webb and then lost to Cal Quantrill.
yeah,
Like that's a good dynamic. That's a good binary that I thought of off the top of my head there.
yeah,
Like,
I mean that's again that randomness to baseball. Sometimes a guy that has a great ERA, great stuff, you just see him better than you do with a soft tossing lefty, which we've seen give the Royals problems before. But I will say when it comes to run differential, because I do like to use it a lot, it will expose teams when it's all said and done. I mean, we talked about
oh
the
yeah,
Angels a little
yeah.
bit. That was a team that even if there are Angels fans listening, I mean, you knew deep down that team was not built to last. And it's not just that they've been beat up a little bit by the White Sox, but they've had a, negative 60 plus run differential for a long time. And baseball, as random as it can iron out those things. Like the Royals back in 2021, when they had the best record in baseball for the month of April. I mean, they were a team that went on to lose 88 games or 87 games, whatever it was. And that was a team you just knew they were getting lucky. When they were, beating teams, it was just barely. They'd win those games 5-4, 4-3, 1-0. And when they would lose and play good competition, they'd get smoked. And those teams will always show themselves the later you get into the season. Now the question becomes, who are the Royals? Are they a team that is going to all of a sudden flip their run differential and they're going to play the best baseball of anybody in the American League the rest of the way? I mean, if you were to say through these, what is it, 112 games so far, they've got a negative 11 run differential. It's 17 runs better than Cleveland, and it's 23 runs better than Minnesota. But still, there's other teams out there going, the Royals are not that good. They're 500 and their run differentials around even. So we can expect them to play like that the rest of the way. But again, it can take 10 to 12 games going back to that stretch they have against Minnesota, Washington, and Chicago and Texas. It can take that stretch of games where you completely flip your run differential. I mean, you sweep a couple of teams, you're only adding in a positive way to your run differential. And then we could look up 15, 20 games down the road and this team's, plus 10 or plus 15. And now they'd have a much better chance of really squeaking into the postseason. But how they played this year, there's a lot of volatility to it. They've been really good before. They've been really bad before. They've not really been as consistent. But the good news is out of the break is they've won, 4 of these first 5 series, and their only series losses against a really surging Miami team. And that's kind of a run they need to go on as well. They have to have that run where they can sweep somebody as good as New York. Like you look at Boston, I mean, you're not asking for them to sweep the Red Sox at Fenway Park, but man, that's at times it's what it takes. You got to go above and beyond to add to a stretch where you really need to play incredible baseball in the final 2 months of the season.
Let's dissect this trade deadline. Let's kind of just give our least favorite and favorite deals for the Royals in the short and long term. Some of them are purely short term moves. I'll start with. I think my favorite deal is probably the Freddie Fermin trade because that's the type of transactionality that had been missing from this franchise for a long time. And there'd been plenty of talk about wanting them to leverage their catching surplus. You didn't know if it was going to be somebody like Freddie Fermin at the big league level or one of their prospects. I don't think anybody's complaining that they did that in terms of trading a catcher. Did they get the deal correct in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I really did like that deal, and for a a backup catcher, and as much as I did love Freddie Freeman, but for a backup catcher who's 30 years old and you've got 3 catchers at the minor league level right now that you're very high on, you get 2 young starters with multiple years of control and starters that had been in the rotation of a team that's in the postseason right now. So it's not like you're going into AAA and finding a 4A guy to flip for Freddie Freeman. I believe they got a lot more value than a lot of people thought for just Freddie Freeman. Now, they took advantage of a Padres team that was so desperate for catching help. I mean, they were getting, offensively speaking, nothing from Martin Maldonado and Elias Diaz. So Freddie goes over there and immediately upgrades that spot in the same way that the Royals needed to upgrade the outfield. And, you got Mike Yastrzemski, you've got Randall Grichuk, and you've got Adam Frazier, all guys that were just upgrades over what they were putting out there offensively. But I did feel that for that first move of the day, a little bit unexpected. I wasn't 100% sure they were going to be moving Freddie. But for what they got in
Is
return and
that
what they
your
desperately
favorite of the
needed,
ones they
which was
made, or did you
starting
like one of
pitching
the
depth,
rentals better?
I thought it was a really good move. Oh, I'd probably say that it was the Freddie deal or the Bailey Falter deal. If I was to make a case for Bailey Falter, they really did not give up anything in that deal.
No.
I was shocked that Pittsburgh decided to trade Falter and hang on to Andrew Heaney, who's going to be a free agent at season's end, and the Royals were able to get a left-handed starter with 4 to 5 years of control for a 28-year-old reliever.
He's a
And I
left-handed
did like
one-out
Evan
guy in
Sisk,
an
but
era where
they're
that's not
not
a
going to
thing
have an
anymore.
issue in
Yeah,
finding
especially
another
to face
Evan
3
Sisk
batters
in their minor. Yeah, absolutely. It's another part to this that the fact the 3-batter minimum is staying in baseball, those loogie guys are not really valuable to the bullpen anymore. You got to be able to get both sides out. And Evan Sisk, just unfortunately, wasn't really given a great opportunity to do so in Kansas City. And they need a starting pitcher. I thought if they were going to deal with Pittsburgh again, Andrew Heaney would have been more plausible than Bailey Falter. This is a guy that has experience working with Brian Sweeney before when they were in Philadelphia's organization. I really believe he can pop, and he's going to get a tough assignment tomorrow going up against Boston at Fenway Park, but it's a good test because both him and Bergert are going to start back-to-back, and they're probably going to be the guys making starts the rest of the way. Unless Cole Reagans comes back and Michael Lorenzen comes back, then you might go to a 6-man rotation or bump somebody out. But I would make a case for the Bailey Falter deal being a really underrated one and one that you might look
Right,
back on
because,
in a year or two and
I
go,
think the Freddie
how did they
deal
get
is the
Bailey
one
Falter
that
for Callan
looks
Moss and
like
Evan
that's the
Sisk?
one that you would feel real good about yourself after making it on a baseball simulator, right? Because the value makes a lot of sense. But those guys are still somewhat projection. Now they do have major league experience. I think Bergert, is going to flourish in at least a reliever role, if not be a starter, which he has succeeded at this year. But Falter is that, you know, that allows them to not have to spend extra money on Michael Lorenzen this offseason. That sets them up. And we'll get into that here in a minute. But I agree. The value might be best on the Freddie deal, but in terms of setting the major league team up for stability, it could be the Falter deal for sure. Least favorite deal, I definitely would say the Adam Frazier trade. Honestly, I think now Randall Grichuk essentially is Tommy Pham, so that's what I said at the time. I would have been more interested in bringing back Tommy Pham. Frazier, of course, has shut everybody up since coming over because he's gotten a couple key hits. But there is kind of this still, if there's one thing that seems to be left over in the JJ Picola era from times past, it seems to be this tendency to settle for the dependability of veterans instead of see what somebody with some projectability and upside can do. And and I think it's telling that they swapped Devaney for him directly, because it's essentially saying we don't want this guy in that utility role. We want the more experienced guy. The value I don't worry so much about. People are worrying about, like, what's Cam Devaney going to be in the long term. I just sometimes am bothered by their obsession with veteran experience. What is your thoughts on the Adam Frazier trade? Which rental did you like the least?
It'd be hard to pinpoint one I really disliked. And it's not to say I loved all of the moves, but for what they gave up, I really wasn't that upset with, which players were going to other organizations. You can start with the Adam Frazier deal. I mean, we can sit here and say that Cam Devaney is going to be the next Brent Rooker or Whit Merrifield, but the likelihood of that is incredibly low. And I feel that at times we latch onto that because either your organization was tied to it. Like, look for Brent Rooker. I mean,
Hmm.
Brent Rooker
Yeah, the
also
Royals
has
were his third team,
200
and his
plate
fourth team was
appearances
where it worked out.
between the
So
Padres and Twins
there's a lot of
before he
people
got into Cleveland.
regretting
Yeah.
that. So
Now, I will say it was a bad move to just outright DFA him,
yeah,
take him off the roster. They absolutely were in a spot where they could have taken more of a chance on him. So I'm not excusing him for that. But you can't look at every Brent Rooker or Whit Merrifield and say, well, a 28-year-old guy in AAA putting up good numbers is going to be that. And I think for the Royals, Cam Devaney was hitting well in AAA. He really was. He wasn't hitting as well as he was back in April or in May. But, John Ray was hitting 320 in AAA before they called him up. Jack Caglione was tearing the cover off the ball in AAA before they called him up. The reality is it's a much different level, which isn't a surprise to anybody. It's just a much different level. You can get unbelievably overmatched playing in the big leagues, even if you've been tearing up in AAA. So for a guy like Cam Devaney, there just really wasn't a spot to play him. And that's why I believe with Adam Frazier, they saw what he was doing in Pittsburgh and said, look, we need someone that could be a super utility player and can hit 250, 255. He was a good clubhouse guy last year. He had been better this year. We're going to move on from Cam Devaney because we aren't going to play him anywhere. It was a total misconception for a lot of people out there that he could play the outfield. He had played one game in left field. He was a shortstop. He was a shortstop and second baseman. And where was he going to play in that Royals lineup? And my answer would be not enough to make a difference. He may have played
yep.
once a
And
week, if that, and might not even finish the whole game.
I think the Royals somehow managed to have two separate deadlines this July because they kind of meaning they got two projects done when the deadline is generally seems to be narrowly focused on one project. Like you are a buyer or a seller, you're upgrading your current team or you're retooling for the future. The Royals somehow seem to be able to thread the needle and do a little bit of both because the Freddie trade is the trade of a seller, or at the very least, it's a trade of a team that is willing to give up some certainty in the now for some projectability in the future, but they also stabilized the bottom part of their roster with their rental trades, which, I tweeted that a couple of days ago. There's a lot to be said for stabilizing the bottom of your roster, especially if you already have guys who you trust at the top of the roster, as the Royals do. So, they kind of seem to be able to get multiple projects done this past month.
Yeah, they stayed pretty consistent with what they were telling everyone, which was they felt this team still had another push in them, but they had to be realistic and understand that deals for the future had to be made. And, for the rental players they got, they really didn't give up much. I mean, to get Adam Frazier, you gave up a guy who likely wasn't going to be on your roster next year. For Randall Grichuk, you gave up a guy that's likely not going to be in your bullpen next year. For Mike Yastrzemski, you could make a case that Junior Marte might be something special in a few years, but the Royals are in a different era now where, they are able to churn out a lot more pitching prospects than they were in the past. And that's probably why they made that deal. But the big home run deals for them were getting pitchers with years of control because the last 2 years they didn't really have a lot of depth in the starting pitching department. As good as they were, they didn't have a number 6 and number 7 starter. Now they've got about 8 or 9 guys that could make starts for them next year, and it allows you
Is
to
there
completely
maybe
pivot
a
and
lesson
focus
to
on
take
adding to the
away
offense
from
this
this?
offseason.
Because, I get the idea that where the Royals were at as the deadline approached, that if you're viewing it binary, that you would probably say they were more of a seller than a buyer. But I thought it was a very teachable moment, and I kind of had an idea this was how it was going to go down because it's been this way and heading this way more so for a while now. But I think there's a lot to be said for if that's what rentals cost, and if that's if trading, uh, I'm trying to think who's a rental on this team. I suppose maybe like Hunter Harvey if he had stayed a little more. They didn't have a ton of, immediate short-term rentals. They didn't have a ton of guys on expiring contracts that played well, but if that's what rentals are going for, I'd rather they be buying them because you talk about like what they gave up, and I agree. Like if they had been on the other end of that and receiving a Cam Devaney type for a utility infielder, you don't feel like that moves the needle much for the long term. So, is that maybe a lesson to take away that you don't necessarily have to uh, commit to one exact path? You just take the best deals because again, I come back to it's all just about value. And so if you're getting if it is a buyer's market for rentals, you buy. And if it is a seller's market for catchers because contenders are hurting in that department, you sell a catcher if you have excess, not because you have no faith in your team, but because it's the smart thing to do. Is there a lesson to take away from this deadline? Maybe that it's not a binary thing, that it's a very fluid process.
Well, I mean, I would say that the Royals committed to buying at this deadline because, the players they acquired are all on the big league roster right now, except for, of course, Stephen Kolek coming over from San Diego. But that was a bit of a nod to the current group of players and telling them that we are going to give you guys some extra help. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you guys and the star players on this team to turn things around. We can't control injuries sometimes. We can't control what other teams are doing. But the goal going into the deadline was to improve the roster, not only for the now, but for the future. And there were people out there that thought, and I was one of them, that thought, this would be the time to trade Seth Lugo and get what you can in return. But we also saw at the deadline that it just wasn't a phenomenal market for starting pitching. The Marlins held on to Sandy Alcantara, and everybody thought he was getting traded. People thought that the Twins were going to trade Joe Ryan. That didn't happen either. And the Royals were in a position where they might have listened to some calls, but if you're not going to get the return for Seth Lugo, you don't have to trade him. That was what everybody was kind of tossing aside, was they don't have to trade him. They feel pretty confident they could get a deal done. And what surprised everybody is they got a deal done before the deadline, and that put to bed, anything about being traded or the possibility of him re-signing or signing elsewhere in the offseason. So to make this push, I believe the thing to learn from it is that the Royals are an organization that are committed to try to put a competitive team on the roster every single year. And if they're at the deadline and they're not where they exactly want to be, they're more inclined to buy than sell. And if you don't have to give up a lot and you can shed some of the guys in the 40-man roster and replace them with guys that can help you right now, I believe it's the better path to go down. It's a path we haven't really seen the Royals do in the past, because even on years where they were absolute sellers, they didn't sell off everybody because they didn't want to tank the rest of the season. They still wanted to be competitive. But if in order to be competitive, you got to make moves to keep your team competitive. And that's what they did at the deadline. And going into the offseason, it's definitely a sales pitch to free agents out there that, hey, if you're here and you're playing for the Royals, you don't have to be 30 games over 500 for this team and this ownership and this front office to believe in you and believe in what you're doing. And that's why I believe it was pretty easy for the Royals to re-sign Seth Lugo. They've shown a commitment to winning over the last 2 years. And same thing goes for Bobby Witt Jr. and his extension, right? You were able to lock him up long-term because there was that commitment to, we're going to try
Were
to
you
build around
surprised
you. We're
Lugo
not going to
took
waste any of
this
these
deal
years
when he
that you
did?
are in a Royals.
I think most people expected he'd get a little more per year, but with his age and stuff, I don't think it would have been this wouldn't have been surprisingly low, a 20 million per year average, basically, because it's 23 per if you technically look at it, but the way it's paid out, he's going to be make 20 million. That's what's going to count against the luxury tax and such. So I don't think the deal itself is surprising, but I was a little surprised he didn't even have much interest in testing the market, which probably says something about his feelings about being here in a Royals uniform. Were you surprised at all that he took the deal when he did, or did you do you think it made a lot of sense for him too?
I believe it made a little bit of sense for him. I mean, I couldn't sit here and say that I wasn't surprised because I definitely was. The announcement of the extension and that it was a pretty team friendly deal. I thought he was going to get something along the lines of what Nathan Eovaldi got for Texas, which was 3 years for 75 million, and he got 2 million less per year with that. Plus, you have that extra option, which is basically all going to be decided by how many innings he throws,
Yeah,
what
I
his
haven't
ERA
seen the
looks like,
specifics on the
all-star
vesting
appearances,
stuff
basically
for
all
that option.
the
Have
extra
you?
accolades you could reach to get.
Yeah,
I have not, no.
hmm.
So that will probably, I could probably do some more digging and find out
Innings
what it's exactly
thresholds
going to
and
be,
Yeah,
but it's probably going
accolades.
to be the
Yeah.
same of all
but
those incentive
Go
bonuses.
ahead. Yeah, just well, I was gonna just move to and that all loops in. So this is kind of a big, multifaceted topic here that I kind of want to wrap up with because it's going to take us a while because there's a lot of nuance to dig in here too. Because signing Seth Lugo, trading for a unexciting but a more of a floor guy than a ceiling guy like Bailey Falter makes a lot of sense. You have your ceiling guys. You have Chris Bubich, who is pitching really well, and appears that he's intact, just overtaxed maybe, and needs that time to heal. He should be good, hopefully, for spring training. Cole Reagans, I'm still. I'll think of anything he gives this season as house money, but again, like both of those guys appear to have avoided major long-term issues. Neither one of them appear to need surgery. So those are your ceiling guys, and then you have your Lugo Waka as your dependable guys, and guys like Noah Cameron and Bailey Falter to set the floor. They really appear to have set themselves up long term, or I should say medium term, the next 2 to 3 years, pitching wise. Do you think this allows them to laser focus in on the outfield finally? Because, last year I give them a little bit of a slack for not doing more to upgrade the position player group because they had some other priorities and they didn't have a ton of prospects at the time. So, they flipped one of their excess pitchers for Jonathan India. They, re-signed Michael Lorenzen. But, they have their pitching, not all of it's necessarily cheap, but it's all locked down. It's all cost controlled. You know what you're spending on it. Does this actually allow them to at least be in the bidding for any given free agent out there? I know Kyle Tucker, for example, is going to be probably outside of the range of a contract they feel comfortable giving to any single player because he's going to exceed Bobby's contract because he's going to be on the open market. So, I'm not saying they're in the bidding for the Juan Sotos of the world, but does it? I feel like they might have set themselves up to actually have the resources and have the stability of the rest of the roster to make a big gamble like that in the outfield this offseason. Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine they're going to put all of their focus on getting some serious help for the lineup because they just can't go through what they've gone through this season. I mean, they can't have an outfield, with the exception of Kyle Isbell, really, who's been a little bit better than he was last year. He's still playing great defense, but left field and right field, you got to have a lot more. But the reality is too, the Jack Caglianone's not going anywhere. I mean, he's going to be a right fielder for this team next year. He'll probably be a right fielder in DH as long as Vinny's at first base, but it allows you to maybe just target a left fielder or, whether that be in free agency or through trade, to go out there and really get a big time impact back, something they were not able to do this past off season. But they also had a couple more holes they needed to fill. And one of the glaring issues of the offense last year was the lack of a leadoff hit. So Jonathan India became one of those guys they targeted. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a couple guys in their mind for the middle of their lineup next year. And because you have so much pitching now and the starting pitching depth, you've got bullpen depth, you've got a lot of these guys coming back that are on contract next year. You can make one huge splash in free agency, put money toward that, or
Well,
make
that's
a
exactly
huge
where I was
trade
going next.
and feel
Which
really good
avenue
about your
would you
lineup
prefer? Of
going into
course, you can do a little
2026.
bit of both, but if the Royals were going to go for a big single upgrade and they're going to try to acquire an outfielder that is a major needle mover that locks down one position again, Tucker is the kind of pie in the sky dream, but like, if you had to choose between giving $300+ million to Kyle Tucker or making a trade that hurts, maybe trading another catcher, one of your prospects, and one of your excess starting pitchers now, like maybe Chris Bubich draws trade interest in his contract year, assuming he's healthy. Maybe you can leverage one of the guys with long-term control that you just traded for and get an extension done with Bubich, something like that. If the choice is between putting all your eggs in that one big free agent basket or putting together a large trade package for a guy who is going to be cheaper and not going to have so much pressure on him, but you may not have him locked down for as long. Where would you go?
I'd probably say somewhere in the middle. I think the Royals could go out there and sign somebody who's not cheap, but not completely overpay. Like I don't see a world in which they're going to be one of those bidders for Kyle Tucker. But you could see a world in which maybe they give a contract out there to Kyle Schwarber, in the offseason and give him
Oh,
a
that'd be interesting.
a 2-year deal for the middle of the order, and then you trade for another bat to be your everyday left fielder, because we know that Kyle Schwarber is not somebody you want
Yeah.
to be playing out there in left field all the time, because he's still got to value defense a little bit. So that's a move you could maybe entertain a little bit. We know they were interested in Starling Marte in the offseason. Maybe that's a guy you sign, and then you go out there and trade for another bat that's
Taylor
above league
Ward
average
is another
that
free
can
agent
give
that'll be out
Starling
there,
Marte some
and he
more
actually
relief, so
plays
he's not
left
having to
field.
be an
So you were
everyday play.
specifically saying that you might be the position to target. So
Yeah, but also too, I mean, they've had interest in him forever, and it just doesn't appear they line up. And now with him entering a contract year, I'm not sure the value is really there anymore. I mean, he's getting near the mid 30s, and the production's been down a little bit. And if they
yeah,
haven't lined up in the last 2 years, I don't see them lining
I
up again in the offseason.
I never know what is the more optimal path because the trade allows you to have long-term financial flexibility, but it also seems like that is kind of a nebulous concept. Like we don't want to put our eggs all in this one free agent basket. And I agree, Tucker is out of their price range most likely and gets to the point where the contract, you're paying the free agent tax and you're probably paying more than even the team that gets him really wants to. But you know, you sign the free agent, you get to keep all the talent you would have traded away. So you're saying kind of thread the needle there. Do you ever feel like the Royals ought to, I guess, bite the bullet and like take that free agent risk? Because I get it, like you know, the real reason that the Royals are so reluctant to do that in free agency is not so much they can't afford it, it's they can't afford it if it goes bad, right? So you can like they can afford Bobby Witt Jr.'s contract right now because he's a star player. If his play declines, that contract looks just as bad as any you hand out in free agency. So it's all just about the rate of return. Do you think that they maybe ought to consider leveraging John Sherman's, seeming interest in building a championship team in free agency and like try to hold on to more of their talent, because then you kind of create a vicious cycle too where that's what a small market team needs is long-term controllable talent. And if you're trading that away to try to get guys at the top of the roster, you create an imbalance there too. So where are you at on the different risks and returns there?
I mean, there's going to be a risk one way or another. There's going to be risk in free agency. There's going to be risk in the trade market. And what I can say is that the Royals have not been shy in trying to dip their toe in the water in both aspects of it. Like last off season, they were willing to give Anthony Santander a big contract. They just didn't want to go 5 years. They thought 3 years would be more acceptable. They were willing to give Jurickson Profar a big contract.
Two major
and
bullets
he didn't take the
dodged right there, by the
contract
way.
and decided to sign with the. Absolutely. Yeah. You look at Santander and what he's done this year, which is not a lot for the Blue Jays, hitting under 180.
He
And
sat
he's
on the
the
bench
hook
this whole
for
series. He didn't
another 5
appear.
years, and he's making $93 million over those 5 years. And he's just been banged up. So it's, it's one of those things where when you do go into free agency, it's not always about who's the best available. It's who's the best fit. And the Royals are a team that really go after their best fits. And that's why I believe, going into the offseason, everybody's going to make their list of who they'd love to acquire. Oh, this guy would make a lot of sense, right? Like I brought up Kyle Schwarber. I wouldn't say he's a perfect fit because he's predominantly a DH, and I believe it'll still take a lot to pry him away from Philadelphia. But the Royals are going to have guys they've targeted that don't even pop up on the radar, that they've had their eyes on for months, and they play against him, and they want him to be in Kansas City next year. That's what they said about Jonathan India in the limited time they played him when he was in Cincinnati. And same thing goes for some of their pitchers. Like when they brought in Lugo and Waka, it was that series in San Diego where, it really popped to them about how good and efficient they both could be. And so for this coming off season, yeah, there will be risk in it. But I will say John Sherman's an owner that's not afraid to give money out to people. I mean, they locked up Waka, they locked up Lugo, they gave Bobby Witt Jr. the extension. They're probably going to be giving more extensions over the next handful of years to guys that have earned that extension, right? Does Vinny get an extension? Does Michael get a minor extension based off what he's making right now? Those are all things I wouldn't put past John Sherman. And certainly we know after last week how transactional
He
JJ
is Jack
Picollo would
Johnson
be
of the Locked
with
On
given the right
Royals
amount of money.
podcast on the Locked On Sports Network. You can check him out over on his YouTube. Check out both of our YouTubes and give us a follow. Jack, great stuff, man. Let's reconvene in a couple weeks, and hopefully they've vaulted a couple teams in the standings, because they still got a lot of that's kind of the last thing I want to talk about, I guess, real quick. Actually, let's pivot here. I think what concerns me about where the Royals are, it has nothing to do with them. It's about the rest of the league, because like they appear to be headed in the right direction, but I see the amount of teams as the concern. It's not how far they have to go. They're not that far back. Only about 4 games, I think, out of the wild card spot. But there's 3 or 4 teams between them. Do you think that, is that maybe where the schedule? Let's look back to that real quick, because we talked about their schedule in the first space. So if anybody missed that, we talked about how, we never know how to weight that schedule thing. Is that what should give us maybe some optimism that the logjam will clear out, because different teams are playing different caliber of opponents, and that's what, like, that, because that's what's bothering me, is just the odds that it is the Royals that sneak in drop with how I guess clustered the middle part of the league is. So what do you have to offer us on those thoughts?
I mean, there's a lot of teams they're going to have to leapfrog. They're right now chasing Cleveland. They're chasing Texas and Seattle and New York and Boston. Of course, 3 of those teams do hold a playoff spot, but also those teams are going to run into rough stretches as well. And you're just hoping that the Royals could be playing some really good baseball when those teams start to falter a little bit. I mean, Cleveland is somebody that didn't add anything at the trade deadline. They actually sold away pieces, and they're going to be without their closer likely for the rest of the season. But I would say that this is a stretch of their schedule where they really got to take advantage, right? If you're going to gain any ground on Boston, you're going to have to take 2 or 3 in this series. But at bare minimum, to keep kind of neck and neck with Boston, or not neck and neck, but within striking distance, you need to take at least 1. But then if you only take 1, you got to go into Minnesota and likely sweep the Twins, because that's what has to happen for this group. They got to have a couple of sweeps on the schedule, and they can't really let some of those favorable games slip out of their grasp. Otherwise, they're going to be looking up at those 3 playoff teams when it's all said and done.
Jack, great stuff, man. Let's talk again in a couple weeks. That's Jack Johnson, and I'm Blake Terrence on the Calling It How I See It Sports Podcast.